Hello, welcome to Woven Minis. Today I've got these old school orc buildings to share with you. These are cheap as chips to make, really quick and easy. I mean, so easy that my 5-year-old's been doing it with me, and if you've seen any of my other videos, you know that I think trying to get them involved in the hobby stuff at early ages is really good. The old school orc vibe, if you're a gamer of a certain vintage, like I am, you may have looked at some of these old white dwarfs, and you may have marvelled at the battle scenes that they had displayed there, like this one, Space Marines versus Orcs, classic. I spent a long time looking at this picture. I love it. The sort of characterful orc settlement that's been built there. And indeed, in the old Titan Legions game, Epic, you had this cardboard terrain, orc buildings, imperial buildings. I don't know why you would have a battlefield with an orc settlement right next to an imperial city, but, you know, whatever, it's up to you, isn't it? But the clear difference in the architectural aesthetic is evident there. The orcs classically had these kind of sand-coloured, I think they're called adobe type buildings, and the classic dark grey monoliths of the Imperial Society. And indeed, in this other white dwarf here, got this great battle report from Titan Legions, incorporating the Grand Warlord Addywood, not playing as the orcs for a change. I love this battle report. It's really, really cool. Read it quite a lot. Got the colourful orcs going on there, but again, they've got a lot of battle scenes here of their terrain. I love the incorporation of the scenery into the buildings. You know, they're sitting on top of cliffs and rocks and things like that. You've got that mega gargant being constructed in the background. You've got a real feeling of a sort of orc settlement built up there, and maybe that's built on the ruins of an imperial city, I don't know. But I love that feel of it. And then, you know, some 40k images here as well. So that it was very much the style of the time to have these kind of sandstone type buildings, whereas now it's a lot more scrap, which is largely derived from the Gorka Morka era, which I don't hate at all. I really enjoy that. But there's something really cool and kind of old school about these sandstone buildings. So that's what I decided I wanted to make. So it's not just the aesthetic, which is why I wanted to make these buildings. It's also, again, if you're as old as me, you remember in some of these old white dwarfs like this one from 1995, they used to have some modelling articles in there. I mean, again, there's another little picture here with another orc adobe building in the background, so they got used all the time. But if you flick through this one, there's a modelling workshop to build a basic imperial strong point, and the end result, it's not, you know, terribly flashy, but look, you could photocopy out all the bits and you could cut out your cornflake packet and make a bit of terrain. I think this sort of thing is really cool, and it sometimes gets a bit lost nowadays because so many YouTube channels and White Dwarf itself have got so sophisticated that the things are so complicated, they're quite difficult to achieve for just an ordinary person unless you spend hours and hours and hours on it. Whereas for me, if you want to get something on the table, that strong point looks fine. Just, you know, plonk a couple of those down and bosh, you've got a great game. And so the same idea with the orc buildings. This is what I wanted to do, was to make something that was very achievable, very cheap, very quick, very easy, and just an effective piece of terrain for blocking line of sight and letting your troops climb on top of and all that kind of stuff. And should, you know, in the end, look pretty good. So this is how I did it. So I've only got work in progress photos of the first few I did because this was a couple of years ago. I was writing a blog about it at the time, not making any videos. But I've got these work in progress pictures, and the basic idea is just getting some polystyrene from packaging and chopping it up, either with a big knife or a hot wire cutter. I actually found the big knife was pretty good for the large pieces of polystyrene. Cocktail sticks used to reinforce when you're sticking the bits together. That's actually a pretty good tip there. Just put a load of PVA on, stick some cocktail sticks in it for reinforcement, push the bits together, and then you can make whatever shapes you want. You're just making big blocky shapes for orc buildings and trying to make it so it's appropriate size for the models to stand on, so they've got space to stand and they get protection from it and all that kind of stuff. I've probably made them a bit bigger than they need to be, but I think they work pretty well. So fast forward to a bit more recently, and I thought I could do with making a few more orc buildings. That worked really well before. And after Christmas, we had, as many people do, this big old tub of Twiglets left over. And I thought, that's potentially quite handy. So we gobbled down the rest of the Twiglets and cleaned out the tub, and got a load of polystyrene. I thought, let's get crafting a few more interesting old buildings to complement the ones I've already got. And that's one of the nice things about this build. It uses a load of old junk, really, so it's extremely cheap. You just need PVA glue, bit of acrylic paint, poster paint, cheap as you like, it's fine, and some sand and some cocktail sticks. That's about it. I like the size of the Twiglet tub for making some sort of watchtower or something for the orcs. I wasn't sure how I was going to incorporate it at this time, but just in terms of size, you could fit a few orcs on there to be a bit of a firing platform. Seemed to be about right. You know, it's all just rule of thumb. So I figured that Twiglet Tower, for me, I thought it would work best if it was part of another building, not a standalone watchtower. I kind of had in mind the way that those buildings look quite organic in the epic pictures, how they're coming out of cliffs and stuff like that. So I thought if I put it on a kind of base and then attach it, you know, it will look pretty cool and kind of emulate that sort of feel. So I, sketched out where it was going to be on the base, used a nice long-bladed, very sharp hobby knife to cut it, cutting it very carefully, mind your fingers, obviously. But you can see here it makes a little bit of a mess, but not too much. And we're using one of these big black trays. They're called tough trays. It was something that they use at my daughter's nursery to do messy stuff in, and it's really good for keeping everything in. I think you also use them for mixing cement and stuff like that. So you can get them off Amazon. Not overly expensive, but well worth it for keeping all the mess in one place. And we gradually built up the overall outline of the building with the various bits and pieces we had, dry fitting them together. My daughter had a lot of influence in what the building was going to look like, which was really nice. Really nice to have her being so involved. She enjoyed it, and so did I. So it's a good thing to do with young kids. So once we kind of dry fitted it and knew what we wanted to do, it was time to start sticking stuff together. And this bit I was pretty proud of, the Twiglet Tower itself. I strengthened it up by filling it with some polystyrene and gluing that in place. That had the effect of slightly misshaping the tower, which I thought was actually quite cool. It made it not perfectly cylindrical, so it looked a little bit more orky. Also made it a bit stronger, and it gave the opportunity for me to use cocktail sticks to poke into the tower to be able to stick other bits to it, because otherwise there was nothing in the tower for the cocktail sticks to purchase on. It's all just glued in with PVA glue, stuff you can get off Amazon, building material stuff. It's not very expensive. Slap it all over the place, and here you are. Slap it in, get your reinforcing cocktail sticks, push them into the polystyrene, which, polystyrene is nice and soft, so that's easy enough, and then position your other piece on top and push it down into place. And with the polystyrene that we'd already glued into the tower itself, I was able to use the knife to make a few holes in the bottom of the Twiglet tube, and then push some cocktail sticks into the polystyrene inside that in just the same way, which again meant that it would just have that reinforcement. It's surprising really how well the cocktail sticks stick in there and provide that extra strength for you to glue it together. Ultimately it's PVA glue drying that gets everything nice and hard. I wouldn't trust it with just cocktail sticks and nothing else, but the cocktail sticks do a great job of helping holding it in place while it dries, and then provide a lot of stability later on. As with everything orky, I think a little bit of variation goes a long way. So I've used a few different methods when I've been constructing the different buildings I've made. A couple of consistent themes, but in general, there's a few little tweaks here and there. This particular one, I decided to use an extra thin piece of polystyrene to create the outside wall. That does a few useful things for you. It covers up any unsightly joins, it covers up any dodgy cutting that you might have done, or if you're using some packaging which has got some gaps in it, you can cover those up with the wall. You also end up with a parapet being pre-built into it, so instead of having to cut a small sliver and trying to fix that in, sticking out the top of the wall to make a little parapet for your orcs to stand behind and shoot from, you can just have that as being part of this wall that you stick on the outside. And the last thing, as was really useful here, was actually tying the whole thing together. So you can see I've put cocktail sticks all over the place, into the tower as well as into the main block of the building, and putting this wall across the whole thing just really helps to keep the tower connected to everything else. Made the whole thing really solid. and has the other benefits I mentioned. So yeah, it's that's a really good methodology. But also you'll see that some of the other buildings I've used lollipop sticks to create a sort of jagged parapet around the outside. And also I have occasionally cut a smaller sliver of polystyrene to make a separate wall. It just depends what works best. And, you know, whatever. I like kind of imagining I am an orc mech building things when I'm doing this sort of stuff. And, you know, what would an orc do? Well, he'd just slap another bit of paint on there, or he'd stick that in that, or he'd poke that through there. And, you know, job's a good one. Once the parapet is all in place, I like to just double check that it's a sensible height for an orc to stand behind and shoot from. Not that he's going to be carrying behind it, of course, but it's always good if the enemy doesn't hit you with bullets before you've had a chance to properly shoot at them. You know, even a goth orc would appreciate that. My daughter decided that the orcs would appreciate a way to get upstairs in the building. I suggested we could just have a ladder, which is easy, or even easier, just say that they go up on the inside, but she wanted a staircase on the outside and one that curves around, so I relented and made one for her. But it's just a case of getting some thin pieces of polystyrene, cutting them a bit shorter each time and stacking them on top of each other with plenty of PVA glue, more cocktail sticks for added support, obviously cutting them down a bit because otherwise they poke through. I wanted to make sure the stairs were wide enough that a 32mm based orc could comfortably stand on them, because then you could get some quite nice photos of them climbing up the stairs, and it makes it very functional in the game as well, if they can actually go up the stairs. So I think it looked really good in the end, even though it wasn't something I initially wanted to do. It was nice, and that's the thing I find with these sort of builds. I didn't start with any specific plan in mind, just had a rough notion of what I wanted to do. I had a Twiglet can, wanted to use it, load of old polystyrene, wanted to use that, and then it's kind of, you know, it organically grows and develops as you go through. That's what I found anyway, and it does feel like a very orky way of doing things. So with the main staircase complete, I then just had to do the bit that went around the corner, because obviously my daughter wanted it to go around the corner to make it as challenging as possible. But it wasn't going to fit in being a straight staircase anyway. And when that was done, it was just the cladding on the walls. The same again to cover up those joins and all that kind of stuff and tie the whole thing together. I cut it down so it didn't stick up too much past the staircase, because that would have made it a bit too weak being such a thin piece of polystyrene. And then it looked something like this. I mean, I didn't have a clear vision of what I wanted it to look like before I started, but if I had done, it would have been something like this. And the main thing I wanted to add was some sort of firing platform on top of the tower, which would make it a better platform for big guns and stuff like that. Building this platform was a little bit more involved than some of the rest of it, but it paid off in the end, I think. So I took the lid, drew around it to get the size of the floor, and then I kind of just straightened up the edges of it to turn it into a rough octagon. Again, taking the orky approach of it doesn't have to be precise, it just has to look all right. Then carefully cut that out so you've got a nice octagonal floor, which was going to be the base for this firing platform. And with all of this, if you're planning it out as you go, you know, drawing on the polystyrene with a marker pen, a Sharpie or something, it's absolutely fine, because you're going to paint over it with very thick opaque paint anyway. So you're not going to see any of these scribbles or guide markings or anything like that. Then came the slightly tricky part, which was just cutting another bit of polystyrene to be about the right height to be a wall for the parapet. I decided I was going to stick it on the outside of the floor, so it'd stick up from there. And I carefully cut them so they were chamfered on the edges so that they would kind of tessellate together to make a wall all the way around. Again, if you were doing something that was, I don't know, Eldari or human designed or something like that, you might try and make this a bit more precise, but you can get away with a lot when you're making orc buildings. I also knew that if there were any gaps, I was going to fill them in later with the painting process, so I wasn't too fussed about it being precise. It just had to be kind of good enough to all hold together and be pretty solid. I was careful, however, to number each of the little walls that I was making and chamfering to make sure that they would tessellate together later in the right order. Rather than having to remember it, just used a marker pen to number each wall and the associated bit on the floor. Again, you won't see the numbers later, which is handy because orcs can't count anyway, so we don't want that to be visible. But yeah, it was a case of just making sure that the walls would fit together, because I knew that they were all slightly different lengths and all that kind of stuff. So although we're not trying to be too precise with it, we're trying to make sure that it does actually kind of fit together without any glaring big gaps, because then the overall structure would be weaker. So all the pieces of my little wall jigsaw were ready to go, and it was a case of get the PVA out, water it down a little bit, ready to slap that on. And again, cocktail sticks for the extra stability once more. In this case, the cocktail sticks, I was jabbing them into the floor, and obviously where that's quite thin, you've got to be careful to make sure that they go in nice and straight and they don't start poking out through the top or the bottom of the platform itself. And you don't want to have too much cocktail stick poking out, because you've got a thin wall to stick onto it. So that was one thing to be mindful of as you're doing it. The other thing was, I was quite pleased with this little tip. I wanted to make sure that the walls themselves were connected together nicely, because they weren't really sticking very well. And obviously they're at an angle, but with the cocktail sticks, I just half broke them. Didn't completely snap them in half, but just snapped them a little bit so they were still slightly connected and, bendy. And then you could actually, poke one side of the cocktail stick into one wall and the other side of the cocktail stick into the adjacent wall. And this worked really well as a way to join the walls together. Obviously, lots of PVA stuck on it as well, but the cocktail sticks are there to provide the scaffolding framework to reinforce it. Once more, I wouldn't trust the cocktail sticks, especially after I've snapped them in half. I wouldn't trust them to hold the whole thing together. But just snapping them a little bit meant that there was enough strength there that really made the walls feel like they were a lot stronger than you'd expect from bits of polystyrene stuck together. I knew that the painting process, which I'm going to cover in the next video, was going to also add to the overall strength and stability of the building, but trying to make sure it's as strong as possible to start with. I mean, the objective with these buildings is to do something really quick and easy, something cheap, and something that you can actually play a game with. And terrain gets knocked about on the table. You can make really, really beautiful terrain, which is all spindly and whatever, but it's going to get knocked, potentially broken. So as much as possible, I was trying to make these pieces quite robust. Polystyrene is not the strongest material in the world. These will suffer wear and tear as models. They'll chip the paint or whatever and chip away bits of the polystyrene. So that's just life. But because these are so cheap, you can easily remake some new ones and replace the old ones, chuck them away, or just get a bit more dollops of paint on and fix them quite easily. And again, because it's orcs, it doesn't really matter if it looks like there's some battle damage that hasn't been repaired very well. Then it just adds to the overall character of the buildings, I think. But yeah, as far as possible, the whole thing with using these cocktail sticks as well as the glue, and then the way that I painted it with the sand and the PVA later on, just makes them as robust as you can. You're never going to be able to keep them completely pristine, but as far as possible, try and get the extra strength in there. So with the firing platform all complete, it was a case of just attaching it onto the tower, again using the polystyrene inside to put cocktail sticks in to give that strength, and then that's the basic structure complete. The firing platform is a nice size to fit a few orcs up there shooting down, or a big gun or something, so that's good. Makes it a real good sort of centerpiece on the table, I think, for defending. Very sort of functional terrain piece, and this was by far the most complicated of the buildings I've made, with the most techniques involved. In the next video, I'm just going to go over making the sort of wooden parapets, the spiky wooden parapets with lollipop sticks, doors and all that kind of stuff, and painting, which is quick and easy process to do, and I think really transforms this pile of junk into a yellow pile of junk, which orcs might call home. So anyway, hope you enjoyed that, and it's got some useful tips in there to do something just fun, easy, quick. Don't get too het up about the details. It's it's a nice kind of project you could do with kids, or wouldn't take you too long to get a nice table full of orc buildings using this sort of methodology. And yeah, hopefully you'll come back for the next one when I'll just finish off this building and the others. All right, thanks a lot. Bye.